Thanks for the opportunity. Looks like I look around the room and it seems like I know about 80% of the people in here, and that may be a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know. I promise I won't tell any stories. No, I might tell a few stories. I'd like to mention that I have Colonel French here today. I have Colonel Turner, along with Sergeant Perrine and Superintendent of State Police, Doug Carter. John Perrine, and I have to say this about John. John was one of the original people, one of the original troopers that we talked to when we started this program 7 years ago with the state police. And John has been critical in the development of this program, and John has probably provided several hundred programs across Indiana. I have to say this about Superintendent Carter. He and I started writing these things almost 30 years ago. I was in my office, and I still remember that day. It was one of the first days I was on the job, and I was a lot like a lot of people. I was in my office, and I was thinking, I'm a new high school principal. What do I do? And I thought, boy, gee, I don't know. And I heard this voice say, hey, is anybody here? And I thought, oh, man, it's a parent. I'm going to get to enroll a kid, you know. So I walked out, and there stood this trooper. It looked like he was 15 years old. He had his campaign hat on, and he said, hey, I'm Doug Carter. I'm here to help. And so Doug and I started writing these programs 30 years ago. And so I give him all the credit in the world for the expertise. The same thing with Colonel French and certainly Colonel Turner. They have the expertise of law enforcement. We've tried to put that together with what educators should be doing. We don't have all the answers. I have to say that Dave Woodward and I, when I was Assistant Superintendent of Public Instruction for Indiana, Dave Woodward and I worked together, and Dave is an individual that I probably learned far more from than I offered. He's an exceptional resource, Dave, and you're an amazing person that started the Indiana School Safety Specialist Academy, and it leads the nation. There's absolutely nobody out there that has anything like this academy, and it's a tribute to what Dave has done. We've provided this program 1,500 times now to 80,000 people. We've provided this, and I will go ahead and get started here. I'll ramble on forever without turning this on. If we have an attorney in the crowd, I did this on purpose, okay? I put it in fine print. We don't have all the answers. We have some of the answers. We just don't have every answer. And so this simply is a disclaimer saying we're doing our best, but please don't think that our situation, our information, the applicable information that we're going to offer covers every situation. It doesn't. We have a lot of different programs. We have this unarmed response to an active shooter event program, and we've provided this program to schools, and that lasted 3 months. And then we started getting calls from churches, places of worship, workplace. We kind of put one program in there with a terrorist version. I've written these Cliff Notes version, 30 or 40 or 50 pages that go along with each one of these versions. So if you want to match up a page with a slide, that's posted free on the State Police website. So each one of these PowerPoints has Cliff Notes version over here. And it's, as I say, there are 50 or I don't know, so pages of notes that explain each slide in the PowerPoint. Posted free on the State Police website. Now we update these things about every 6 or 8 months. So the version that's on there is a 2018. We're doing the 2019 as we speak. So that's all free. Debriefing forms, that's just simply a form that a lot of schools, we like it when they use this form. This form is a way to test people's response and update, not really test, but to learn from people's response. For instance, it says a really upset parent came into the front counter. The person that encountered that parent says, this is what I did, this was the problem, this is what I did, this is what I learned, and this is what I'll do next time. If you do that when you have critical situations, you learn from every single one of them, and you modify your plan with this debriefing form. So every time that you have a critical situation, it can be an active shooter or an active threat, or it can be as simple as a parent wants to see their child and they don't have custody. So we learn from every single situation. It's an amazing tool. And we're finding more and more schools are using it. It's just a simple way, a cost-effective way, and you pass that out to everybody that's in that same kind of job description so that everybody learns from every one of these minor kind of events. Real quickly, we have school bus tips, climate survey. As I said, I'm not going to read all this to you. We have a lot of information. Some of these things are a page or two long, and so some of these things are very brief in nature that you can just pass out to everybody, go over it in 2 or 3 minutes of a faculty meeting and go on with your regular business. These are just products across the board. Some of them are 50 or 60 pages long. Some of them are a page long. But these are things that are posted on the State Police website. I might put your attention to the bottom line walkthrough initiative. If somebody wants to establish a relationship with their state troopers in the area, they can call the post and get the state trooper to do a walkthrough. Come into your school, talk to your government class. So these troopers are amazing. We've trained 80 troopers in 2 and 3 and 4 many times, sometimes larger groups, to provide this unarmed response to an active shooter event program. We have 80 troopers, and they don't do this as a full-time job. They do this in addition to their job. So they come and do these programs for free. These programs are just simply amazing. I want to mention this, too, about our unarmed response to an active shooter event program. And this is where this is really a unique opportunity, both for the state police and for schools. When our state police, state troopers go to a school, you may request, actually you can go online and request it, but you may request that our state troopers do a practical experience after or before they do the PowerPoint. That practical experience is this: they partner with local law enforcement and they have a perpetrator, that's a trooper or a local law enforcement officer, play the role of an active shooter, and he enters the building firing off blanks. We're not the ones that shot people with the airsoft gun, okay? But we do go in and fire off blanks. 2 or 3 things happen when that happens. One, teachers start to hear what a gunshot sounds like. If you've been in schools, and we all have, the way schools are laid out, if you fire especially a handgun around the corner down 2 hallways, you can't tell where the shooter's coming from. 20 years ago, last January, an 11 and a 13-year-old were smart enough to pull a fire alarm and evacuate people out into a killing field. That's what this drill helps, because it allows us to understand the importance of not just simply running blindly. Running blindly, escaping is a great option. Running blindly is not a good option, because you run right into the shooter. And this drill allows people to understand, say, well, that gunshot sounds like a locker slamming. It sounds like somebody dropping a book, or I don't know where the shooter is. And that's a critical component in an active shooter event. We know that Stoneman Douglas is probably another example where the shooter was smart enough to pull the alarm, got people out into a killing field. You don't have to be a good shot when you do that. So this practical component is available, and we will come to your school and do it in your school building, free. Now, you can't just say, I want to do this tomorrow. We do have 80 troopers that go out and do this, but they have to be notified. We need to schedule them. You can go to our state police website, and it says schedule a program. So please understand that you'll be able to do that. Real quickly, the last one I want to mention, last two, I guess, we have 17. Number 17, it's a tabletop exercise, and what I did was I created 2 imaginary shooters. Tabletop's different than the traditional tabletop. You know, usually tabletops go, it's 1201, it's 1202, it's 12. What I did with this one is I take the first paragraph, for instance, and describe this elementary student and all the issues that he has. And then right below that, I put questions in there for you to look at your group and your school safety plan and say, this is what we would do when we encountered a child like this. It's different than the traditional model. And then the next, third slide, let's say, says, okay, he's in the 2nd grade. He has emotional health issues. He was picked up by law enforcement because he had killing dogs in the neighborhood, and so forth and so on. Then I started with the other shooter, and they progressed through this tabletop exercise. To be very frank about it, we haven't posted this yet because we're still looking at the legal side of some of the arguments. They step on some people's toes. Educators know that. You might have had this. I know you did. I know you have. You may have a situation where you've had a student that transferred from school A, was a bad actor, transferred to school B, maybe got arrested, maybe was in the juvenile justice system, transferred to school C, and did that information come with him? Well, what if he went off probation while he was in school B? Or what if he was diagnosed with some emotional health issues, maybe even had an IEP, but then in the 2nd school, parents said, no, I don't want that help anymore. And he goes to the 3rd school or the 4th school. So that's what I tried to talk about, real world experiences, things that I know have happened. So anyway, that's one of the things that we find there. The Indiana State Police, and I'm going to go through these very quickly. The Indiana State Police have changed our definition over and over again. We're hearing from a lot of the government agencies and large law enforcement entities throughout the country that we're going to see more attacks by automobiles, airborne vehicles, explosive devices. We traditionally think of an active shooter as being a firearm or utilizing a firearm. We're hearing, and they've been pretty accurate, unfortunately, in the last few years, we're seeing this as a potential. You know, can you imagine people at an extracurricular event all packed in front of that gate? So those are the things that we have to start thinking outside the box and thinking about threats that are more than just with a firearm. If you look at Indiana, gee, I'm just so impressed with all the things that are happening. So impressed with the response of schools in Indiana. Not that this won't all go away tomorrow, but schools in Indiana need to be commended for what they've done. Okay, the Indiana State Police model. We put prevention on the front end. We took the old traditional run, hide, fight model, and we said we're going to put prevention on the front end because we think prevention is always preferable to response. Our model is nonlinear as well. We put prevention on the front end and it's nonlinear. A lot of models go bang, bang, bang. You have to do this, then this, then this. Our model, you may fight the first time, then you may escape, then you may turn right back around, fight again, then you may lock down. The prevention component of it, we've just talked about. The options are combined sometimes. You may lock down and be in a lockdown situation and then have to fight. So you may combine these options. You may repeat them over and over again. The response option is determined by the stimuli of the event. That means the proximity to the shooter. That means the type of weapon they have, the availability to a path that you can escape. your ability to get to a lockdown situation. So the stimuli of the event, that would simply be the conditions of the active shooter event. The stimuli of the event determines what response you exercise. In order to take advantage of active shooter models, and we really have gotten this from a lot of the models that we've reviewed, somebody always knows. School people in this room, kids talk. Kids talk. And I remember, I tell this story, and I know a lot of the people who have been building administrators will go, oh, wow, that brings back memories. But I had this kid that if I wanted to know what happened, I would call him down, and I'd say, Rich, tell me what's going on. You want me to tell you, or you want to tell me? And I was always regretting saying that, because he says, okay, we're going to have a party this weekend. We've got the booze from so-and-so. We sold it from the garage. And I'm going, oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I just wanted him to tell me, you know, who painted the locker out here, you know? So kids talk. Kids talk. And certainly the ones that are developing into shooters talk because they are trying to get that fit in. They're trying to be one of the crowd. They're trying to be part of a group of in-crowd people that they really have seldom opportunity to be identified as. They share their intent with others. They talk. Shooters develop over time. You know, we have all too often the story comes out that, you know, Rich was a really great guy. He was a prom king. He was this and that. And he just snapped. Not the case. People that do this all the time know this. These people do not snap. They develop over time. They develop in plain sight. They have an extreme fascination with active shooter events. They love those things. You know, one of the best examples, obviously, is the Sandy Hook. I know you all know about that. Sandy Hook person had this pyramid. And at the top was an empty spot. And that pyramid had all the shooters. And that empty spot was for him because he was going to kill more people than anybody else. They talk about it. They have a fascination with previous events. They have an extreme fascination for weapons. Just because you go to the range once in a while, you shoot with your father and mother, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about somebody that just can't get enough of looking at weapons and dealing in weapons. Extremely large quantities of weapons. You know, we find that they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rounds, more than they could ever use in their car. Sometimes they carry a lot with them. But these people accumulate huge numbers of weapons. And there's typically a trigger. And that trigger may be, as it was in Stoneman Douglas, if we look at the fact that his mother died, and she was the one that kind of ran roughshod on him, if you please. And he progressed from that point. He was already headed down that path, don't get me wrong. But he really became a little bit more dedicated to being this horrific person that he turned out to be. This is really important right here. Behavior indicators. This comes from a whole lot of research and a whole lot of studies. But it also comes from 26 years as a school, you know, actually 30 years as a school administrator. It comes from being in a high school every day. You know, kids want to fit in. And I don't think many times, I didn't realize it till I really sat down and really tried to think about it, how strong that desire to fit in is. They will do just about anything to fit in. And if they're somebody that doesn't fit in, they become isolated, they become desensitized. And you know, with all due respect and with great deal of respect for Colonel Grossman, I think he has a point, but it's just not video games. It's all the things that we see in movies and what we magazines and what we talk about with our fellow students. We become desensitized across the board, these kids do become, because it becomes their life. It's what they talk about. It's what they immerse themselves into. They start to fail to have any empathy. Some of you will know who I'm talking about. I'm just going to kind of throw this out here, hypothetically. There was a shooter in Indiana that killed a guy for no reason. Shot a guy just walking along, killed him. I had an opportunity to go back and talk to this young man that did the crime. First, second grade teacher, principal, elementary principal, junior high teachers. You know what they told me? Man, we knew he was, Rich. Man, that kid he was scary. So we knew in the first, second, third grade, we knew in elementary, upper elementary, intermediate, junior high, we knew. But we just wanted to help them. And that's what's really scary. These kids are starting to develop. Yeah, it doesn't happen once in a while, you know. I'm going to, this is, I guess, matter of record, another situation. I was in my office as assistant superintendent. One of our Fishers PD guys came in and said, "Hey, Rich, I got to talk to you. I've been talking to the teachers, and they're talking about this young man and I think he's really going down the wrong path." I said, "What do you want to do?" Fishers PD, SRO, said, "I'm going to go to his house, talk to Mom." I went, "Wow, that's great." So Randy went to his house, talked to Mom, started talking to Mom, said, "You know, I'd kind of like to get in and see his bedroom." "Oh, we don't go into his bedroom." So Randy says, "I'd like to see his bedroom." So Randy finally talked his way in, went into the bedroom, opened the closet door, and there was a bag in there with paraphernalia for pipe bombs. Who knows what would have happened had it not been for Randy McFarland. Amazing, scary, but true story. So these things really happen. People develop over time. They desensitize because of the activities. They want to fit in. They do about anything to fit in. And then they do some of these other things. Cruelty to animals, torture animals, cruelty to classmates. That's a biggie. You know, these people are kind of predators sometimes. They get into a situation where they're looking for a weak person because they're just so intent on creating harm. I'm going to talk about in just a minute, I'm going to talk about an intervention team. And that intervention team is a cross-section of individuals, healthcare individuals, counselors, administrators, deans, teachers, across the board. And if we have that intervention team, when they see a student that's doing all these things, then they meet and they develop a plan to help him. Now, if he's already done all these kinds of things, then that's where our system has failed a lot of people, because we can't just dump them out there, and that happens someplace. But what happens is we put them in a special program somewhere. There are those kinds of programs. We do these things, but sometimes the kid doesn't stay. We gather information on these kids. We're going to provide opportunities for people to get them help. You know, right now in Indiana, we use the Fusion Center, right? The Fusion Center is associated with this statewide calling, and I think the Fusion Center would say this honestly, that we're better off if we get that information to local people. Local people know these kids better than anybody. And if you had some statewide program, a lot of times that information doesn't have all the background that local people will have if you get to them. So that's the reason I put in here, you have the old standby tip lines and call, you know, all these things that everybody kind of goes, "Oh, those are old, outdated things." There's nothing wrong with those to supplement gathering information. Establish a mentoring program where you have teachers, like I talked about. Bring law enforcement into schools establish an assistant or intervention program. And Clyde, this is what I'm going to talk about here. The intervention team is a cross-section of school resource officers, of guidance counselors, of mental health professionals. And what we want to do is get to this kid before he gets into the point that you were talking about. Once they get into this point where we're going to have to remove this kid from school if we can. Some of you educators are going, yeah, if we can is a big issue. Because the laws are a little different if this person is already in a program. So what I guess I'm saying is this. We need to establish an intervention team that gets involved early on and supports this kid. And that intervention team, again, is mental health professionals, school resource officers, teachers, support staff people. And that intervention team monitors the school population. Now, they're not a bunch of people that call law enforcement and say, you got to come and arrest Rich right off the bat because he's going to create issues. There are intervention teams in each building, for instance. Because if you don't do that, they fall through the cracks when the kid goes from an elementary school to an intermediate school. If these teams aren't talking together, we forget that kid. And that kid starts all over again as he goes or she goes to another building. So this intervention team sets up a program to help this student early on. Now, if we miss this kid and this kid, I guess what I'm saying is I believe, and I really do believe this, I believe that we can intervene early on if we have effective intervention teams. And we can identify these kids before they get to the point where we just have to kick them out of school. And there's not a good answer. If you have a kid that is a bad actor and has no protection under 504, 94, 142, or any of the special education laws, if there's not a protection there and that kid gets kicked out of school and nobody knows where he's going, it kind of mirrors Stoneman Douglas, because that's exactly what happened there. People knew about him. A lot of agencies knew about him, but he was just out there. Before, this is what breaks your heart, before he got lost out here in the nebulous world or whatever, he had all kinds of issues, and we didn't do anything about it, or we didn't do enough about it, I guess. You know, I understand that people, caseloads are just overwhelming and all those kind of things, but that's what we need to do. Our response options are based on the stimuli of the event. Escape, lockdown, fight. You can exercise them in any order. They are determined by the circumstances of the event. Position yourself to observe and take away detractors if you want to be aware of what's going on in your schools. Be in a state of high alert. You know, there's a program out there called OODA Loop, and then there's another program or another part that talks about different colors of being aware of what's going on around you. But really what we're simply saying is we want you to be relaxed but be aware of what's going on around you. You cannot respond, you will not respond appropriately if you're not aware of what's going on around you. I'm trying not to get too windy here. If we're looking specifically at what determines a response, we have to understand the characteristics of an attack. If you look and study all these active shooter events, there's some very basic, straightforward things that happen. These people are opportunistic. They take people as they encounter them. And you know, if you talk to the people or you see interviews with the people that actually did this and didn't take their own life, they talk about they just take them at random. They're opportunistic, they take easy targets. You know, these guys don't want to go where law enforcement is. And that's the reason visible law enforcement is such a big thing. The best thing you can do is the right thing, the next best thing is the wrong thing, the worst thing you can do is nothing. If you do not prepare yourself mentally, and by that can be nothing more than visualizing what you ought to do in case something happens. If you want to put yourself into that high alertness, then you'll be able to respond. If you don't, 100% of you, me, will freeze in place. Our law enforcement's been trained not to. So they come out of that millisecond frozen state. But we won't. A great example, I did the International Association of Theaters. And I was talking to them about theater shootings. I want you to visualize theater shootings, okay? Let's say this is the screen back here. Where are the exits? Okay, some people are pointing here, right? But you know what? Almost 100% of the people in theater shootings, you know what they did? Because they came in the exit in the back, they tried to get out that way. They were 20 feet from an exit here and here, and they didn't do it. They froze in place. You just don't think like you think. You don't reason things like you think you would. The escape option, take a secure path to a safe area. Escape option may be one of the very best options out there. If you have an opportunity to get away by a safe path, don't run blindly. Take advantage of a pathway that has a little bit of cover or something that might stop a projectile, but please don't run blindly. Running blindly is not a good. If you look at lockdown option, and this is something that I need to really say about lockdown options. The lockdown option is wonderful. Noblesville did a fantastic job with the lockdown option. This was actually a law enforcement officer told me this. They said, you know, Rich, we couldn't get into that room because the kids piled so much stuff in front of that door. When they went up to clear the building, they said, hey, let us in. We're Fishers PD or we're Noblesville PD or we're, and they went, we're not good. We're not, no, we don't believe this. They simply barricaded that door so amazingly that nobody could get in, and that's exactly what we want them to do. So secure and lockdown. I started to say this about lockdown. Let me say this. And I know as a building principal, I did this. If I had a robbery in a strip mall that was close to one of my elementary schools, we put them on soft lockdown. And that's where we just lock down the perimeter of the building. The problem with that is you're only putting a glass door between the threat and your students. I've been in thousands of elementary schools, and I'm yet to find one. If I walk to the door and an elementary student's walking down the hallway and I go, hey, let me in, they will always let me in. I'm an adult. Okay, I'll let you in. So lockdowns need to be, see guys, some people call them secure lockdowns. Some people call them complete lockdowns, whatever the case may be. If we're worried enough to call a lockdown, we need to secure everybody behind a locked door as well. Because if we don't, we're just putting a glass door between them and harm. And you know what? I didn't even think about that. I used to do this, and you know why? Because I wanted to be able to move my kids around. I wanted to continue school. And it happens all too often in Indiana. We're getting the message, but we really don't have the problem solved yet. Fight option. Boy, fight option's tough. There are some really good examples out there and some great strategies. Superintendent Carter used to tell me all the time that if you can get people to thinking about what they can do and what they really need to do and all these things, they're going to be able to do far more than they really think they can do. Do it as a group as well, a lot of times, is a great example. The fight option, plan your strategy and practice, coordinate the attack. Identify potential weapons. I was at an active shooter program not too long ago, and I had this wonderful teacher that was about 98 pounds, and I said, okay, we're going to fight tell me what you're going to do. And she said, I'm going to pick up this office chair and I'm going to clobber him. I said, boy, that's great. I said, pick that up. You got to pre-identify what you're going to use as a weapon, because you know what happens if that office chair's too heavy? You just stay there. That's the way your mind works. I've made up my mind, I'm going to use this office chair, and I'm not going to take an alternate path. I'm going to use this office chair. And you don't use the office chair. You bring the threat into your circle of violence. If the shooter comes in the only door here and I'm over here with a chair, I'm in his circle of violence, he's not in mine. I need to take a place of advantage with my weapon, my improvised weapon. Remember, the model is nonlinear. You may fight, then escape, then lockdown, fight, escape. You may use them in any order. Superintendent Carter is going to give a real brief introduction. We were able to film, using kids and teachers, a real quick program that demonstrates some of the principles that we've talked about. Okay?
Thank you for taking time to view this presentation on a topic that has become all too familiar to educators and law enforcement throughout this nation. This presentation varies and expands the prevailing paradigm of simply run, hide, or fight in an active shooter event. It also expands the traditional definition of active shooter to encompass one or more subjects who participate in a random or systematic attack with a variety of weapons. Our goal is to provide educators with prevention and response options to exercise in an active shooter event. By exercising these options, educators may better be able to prevent an active shooter event, or if the unthinkable occurs, exercise response options to secure their safety as well as the safety of those in their charge. We feel educators know their school and students better than anyone. This program provides options that may increase the possibility of preventing or surviving an active shooter event.
We found too that really our bus transportation systems are very vulnerable. And so the next one was the applying of our model to a bus situation. Difficult. Once that person's on the bus, some of your options go out. Hiding is only a transitional kind of step, and we'll talk about that now. If you're in a situation where a shooter gets on the bus, the best thing you can do is shut that door. And we try to emphasize that to bus drivers. A lot of people don't think that door is very stable or very secure. It's unbelievably secure. Some of our SWAT team guys talked about the fact they could not get in that door. So that door is very functional. So keep the security, the integrity of the perimeter of the bus is the very best thing we can do. Bus drivers need to be mentally ready, if they can, to step up and allow the students to have an opportunity to escape. And that's typically occupying the shooter. We filmed this on Mooresville school buses. It gives you some idea of what the challenges are when we have a bus situation.
Good morning, Addison.
Good morning.
How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Oh, great.
Who is that guy?
I don't know.
I haven't seen him before.
We want to credit the Indiana Department of Education and Mooresville and Sergeant Chris Kath for putting that transportation video together. We're trying to just demonstrate the fact there are a couple things. One, keep the threat off the bus. Drive away, shut the door. And I can't tell you how many bus drivers that I've talked to and that I've observed over the years. If a parent walks up to the bus, they open that door to talk to them. Instead of leaving the door shut, checking the traffic, and allowing the person to come around and talk to them through the window. Our transportation people recommended that highly. A lot of people just didn't think about that. Their immediate response was when somebody walks to the door. Now, this guy had a gun, but if somebody walks to the door so many times, they let that parent climb right on the bus or that adult. And we don't know all the parents, so we want to make sure that we don't get ourselves into a situation where there's really nothing we can do, but hopefully allow the bus driver to distract the shooter, if you please. Law enforcement, when they arrive, they may be in full tactical gear. I used to hear John Perrine talk about the fact that he lives next to Sheridan, and he may show up with cut-off shorts on and a campaign hat and a vest and all this kind of stuff, but he may not look like all law enforcement officers. Hundreds of law enforcement officers will be coming to the scene, hundreds. And it's just the response is overwhelming when you've been to one of these active shooter events. So we want to make sure that you understand that law enforcement's not going to just look like they typically would. They may be in all kinds of attire. Indiana counties have the best 911 program in the country. They say calling is best, but it is the best. They've worked really, really hard, and I met with 911, I guess it's a department or council or group, and they were just amazing. So real quickly, these are some things that administrators may want to take back. Most of the things you're going to have. Some of these things you might not have. We've been preaching this for 7 years, and a lot more schools are doing it now, but it's one of the requirements for the Secured School Safety Grant is to have an assessment. But you are hard-pressed to find people that will give you a definition of an assessment. Doesn't that sound like I'm from the government and I'm here to help? So next Monday, I'm talking to all the non-pubs in Indiana, there's 200 or so, and we're going to talk about some assessment resources. We would really love to underscore that the way it should work is you do a comprehensive threat assessment, not a facilities audit, but a comprehensive threat assessment that starts out by meeting with the community, by developing and reviewing policies at the administration level, doing all these kinds of things before you ever get into looking at whether you have fencing and lighting in the parking lot and a secure perimeter in the buildings and all that kind of stuff. A comprehensive threat assessment is a very long process. And so we would really like for people to start thinking about working on a comprehensive threat assessment, and there really are not very many. Liability is a big issue. A lot of people stay away from it because if somebody comes in and does your assessment and then you have an issue with an active shooter, they're going to say, hey, we had a threat assessment. So a lot of people don't do it. Anyway, comprehensive threat assessment should then develop your comprehensive safety plan from the vulnerabilities that you uncover in your assessment. So we do it backwards a lot of times, almost always. So a comprehensive safety plan should be developed to address the vulnerabilities that have been found in the assessment. Climate assessment, one of the things in the very first few slides that I talked about, I've written 50, 60 queries in comprehensive climate questionnaire. Pick the ones that you like, and you can administer those to a select group of a few people in your school, both the staff, there's one for staff, and then there's one for students to determine, do they have somebody they can go to? Do they feel safe at their lockers? Do they feel safe coming to school? Do they feel safe on the bus? Are they bullied? Blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. So we have one of those for, and then they have one for staff, because the more staff I talk to, this is the reason I couldn't be a principal. Again, you guys, it's too tough a job. You do an amazing job. I just couldn't do it. Talks about, do you feel safe in the classroom? You'd be surprised. I was surprised. Do you feel safe in the classroom? Do you have students that worry you? Do you have do you feel like you're supported by the administration or so forth? Do you have a procedure in place when you have a kid that you think's developing into a major issue? What do you do? Do you have, you know, in this, there are 2 different documents posted free on the state police website that have query after query after query after query. And you can pick out the ones that you want to utilize. So, job description flip charts. Boy, this is huge. We have flip charts for like all the classroom teachers. But as classroom teachers know, your job's different than the teacher over here and over here, because your students are different. So we need to kind of look at flip charts and make sure they are segregated, if you please, by job description. Tabletop exercise, that's the one I talked about. I don't know what we're going to do with it yet, but it's maybe posted. Debriefing forms, I've talked about that. Universal sounding of the alarm. You know, all too often in schools, and this doesn't happen as much as it did 7 years ago, but when I used to go to schools, and I'd walk into the front counter and I'd say, you know what, this happened, Dave, when we were doing the audits for the Indiana Department of Education. You'd say, I'm creating an issue, and who can sound the alarm? And the receptionist will go, well, I go get the principal. Why can't she do it? If you look at, again, I don't want to keep using Stoneman Douglas, but if you look at Stoneman Douglas, that was one of the major issues that jumped out at me, was the fact that they saw this kid walking across the, you know, the field. Why didn't they sound the alarm? You know what, people, for a long time, and we're getting better in Indiana, but for a long time, there was 1 or 2 people in the building that could sound the alarm, because you know what they told me? They said, what if it's a false alarm? Use it as one of your drills, your mandatory drills. I don't care. It's not an issue, but that happens it doesn't happen as much anymore. It still happens in some schools. Visible law enforcement, I still say what I've said for 30 years. If I'm going to come to this building, I'm not totally nuts. I'm not going to come in there if I see an armed, trained law enforcement officer there. I'm going to go someplace where I can kill people. I'm not brave. I'm just going to go somewhere where I can get the job done. Shelter in place. It's what I said earlier. Don't have a lockdown that's a soft lockdown. I just really believe that that's not doing anything. That's setting yourself up for failure, because somebody will shoot through that door. I ran over, but I think you mentioned that you had to have enough time for John to do his complete program, so that's not an issue.
You're the most important part of this.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry I got windy. I just couldn't stop. I'm just having so much fun. This is my contact information, so I'm more than happy. You can call me anytime. That's my cell. A lot of times I'll just say, man, I don't know. Sometimes I'll say, well, you know, that happened back in the dark ages, and this is what we did. But please feel free to do that.